A while back, I posed a question for my audience at the end of one of my videos. A question that simply went, did Claude shoot Maria? If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me give you some context. At the end of Grand Theft Auto 3, the protagonist, who remained nameless throughout the game, however the files call him Claude, finally managed to take revenge on his ex-girlfriend who betrayed him, shot him in the middle of a heist, and left him for the police at the beginning of the game. It's a simple A to B story that permeated through most of the game. Claude, after breaking out of the prison van, gradually builds himself up and allies himself with more and more powerful figures until he's able to finally face the person who betrayed him. Then after Catalina, the ex-girlfriend, goes down in a firestorm of twisted metal, Claude walks off into the sunset, or possibly the sunrise, with Maria. Who is Maria? Well, she's the pseudo-love interest, in the loosest way possible. She was the wife of Salvatore Leone, one of the gang bosses that Claude allied himself with. However, Maria took a liking to Claude after he chauffeured her like once, and decided as a form of revenge that she was going to claim to Salvatore that she and Claude were having an affair. This led Salvatore, who was a twisted paranoid psycho by this point, to betray Claude and attempt to have him killed as a favor to the Colombian cartel, who was the gang that Catalina was working for. So not only does she f*** everything up, she screws over a guy who she barely knows and leaves him a dead man walking on mafia turf. It's at this moment that she should have thanked her lucky stars that she wasn't dealing with Tommy Vercetti or Trevor Phillips. As a sort of make-good, Maria essentially helps Claude escape after she screws that particular pooch and gives him an in with the Japanese Yakuza. While Maria is positioned as the pseudo-love interest thereafter, Claude is obviously not interested. I get the impression that at the very least the people around them assumed they were an item. I mean, Catalina uses Maria as a ransom going into the final mission. Either way, at the end of the game, everyone is defeated and both Claude and Maria are the last two standing. They both then walk away from the massacre while a news report plays about what went on, only to then fade into Maria complaining about what this whole experience was like for her.
The police, a single gunman that he saw fleeing the scene with a dark-haired woman.
We're gonna have such fun, cause you know, I love you, I really do, cause you're such a big, strong...
The screen fades to black with her still complaining, and then she is silenced by a gunshot, and then we fade into the credits music.
I broke a nail, and my hair is ruined. I mean, can you believe it? This one cost me $50.
So the million-dollar question for me is, did Claude actually shoot Maria? Did he decide as a final punctuation to the story to kill the only other surviving person? Or did he just simply fire a shot into the air to get her to shut the hell up? You see, I've put a lot of thought into this, and to this day I still can't really decide what the answer is definitively. Now, apparently the actual real-world reason for the gunshots, well, I've gotten two different explanations. The first one I heard is that it was some sort of audio glitch that they just left in because it was more trouble than it was worth to fix. And the other reason was that the developers thought that the ending rant went on for too long and decided to cut it off early. Personally, I think the latter reason makes more sense. I've never made a game, but I've edited audio for years, and I don't know how that sort of glitch happens. Furthermore, I don't know how it would be kept in. Plus, if there was more to her speech, it would continue after the gunshot if they intended to keep the thing going. It makes more sense that they just wanted to cut it off early, but I don't know, maybe there's something that I'm just ignorant about. It's all well and good that there's a real-world reason for it, but having a real-world reason necessitates an in-universe reason. You can't get away with the Incredible Hulk streaking past the screen during a production of Les Miserables and just brush past the whole thing by saying it was a computer glitch that rendered him into the movie. So let's look at the facts, starting with Claude himself. The thing about Claude is that he was by his very design and very nature a very stoic, stone-faced protagonist. He was also a completely silent protagonist, two factors that when combined meant that it's hard to gauge his personality in any way. And I feel like some people are more willing to read into his blank expressions and his insistence on carrying out instructions without a word as more than what it is. You can say he lets his actions speak for themselves, but even his actions are pretty minimal. To me, in a lot of cases, his personality is just the flatline heart monitor sound effect, but with that said, however, there are still two distinct facts about his personality that you can't deny just based off his actions and the plot structure. One, he's basically a sociopath. Not only did he willingly go along with what was retconned as an almost 10-year crime spree with Catalina, he clearly enjoyed it, and clearly enjoyed the company of Catalina considering the relationship that we saw glimpses of in GTA San Andreas. And also heard, but the less said about that, the better. To enjoy that level of crazy and to work with / be in a relationship with them for 10 years, you need to be crazy yourself. Crazy is as crazy does and all that. So he's not a good guy, and he's never been a good guy, as is displayed throughout the entirety of GTA 3 when he does a lot of messed up things to a lot of people to further his own agenda, oftentimes without a second thought. Basically, he is fully willing to kill anyone in his way to get his way, including his own allies. All it takes is a better offer, and even that's debatable considering the fact that throughout this game, very few people talk about how much they're willing to pay him.
Asuka has a little job for you, but when you're done, drop by my casino and we can talk.
Sure, there's an unspoken understanding based on general video game progression that every next mission will gradually bring him closer to his overall goal, which is revenge on Catalina. We understand that, but Claude doesn't necessarily understand that, which means that from his perspective, he's just blindly following orders and killing whoever to move along this nebulous path to an uncertain goal. To do that, especially when doing the things he does, you have to be a bit of a sociopath. Even worse is when he explicitly kills people who he's allied with or had only just been cut off from. Okay, prepare yourself for this one. Salvatore may have been a complete nutjob, but Claude went after him without a second thought, in spite of the fact that any normal person would have felt just the slightest bit of remorse over killing someone who was so good to them, even though they had just betrayed him. Especially when the betrayal was due to actions of neither of the parties involved. Like, yeah, he would go through with it, even if it's just a matter of survival, both to take out Salvatore and as a gesture of goodwill towards the Yakuza, but that doesn't mean that any sane person wouldn't feel a bit melancholy about the fact that the whole situation went the way it did. Yes, I know I might get roasted for saying this, but I do fully believe that if someone's your friend, even if they did something completely unforgivable, cutting them off is still not a pleasant experience, whether it's extreme like this, or if it's mundane. Then there's one that I don't really need to explain as much, Kenji, who is the co-leader of the Yakuza. The same Yakuza that Claude was still allied with. He also owes Kenji's sister Asuka everything because she was the one who helped him out of the situation with the Mafia that would have ended up with Claude being killed. Also, yes, I know that in the real world it's pronounced Asuka, however I'm pronouncing it how they pronounce it in the game. The worst sin that Kenji committed was getting pissy at Claude.
It would appear your attempts to dissuade the Jamaicans from becoming bedfellows with the cartel were wholly inadequate. Yardie pushers line Liberty streets selling packets of spank like they were selling hot dogs!
So yes, if I was in Claude's shoes, I would be angry at the fact that I had done everything that Kenji wanted me to do, but he just kept getting angrier and angrier, but there's still a fine line between feeling disrespected and deciding to straight up kill someone without a second thought. And while both these instances are a mark of a sociopath, there are several other instances that point in this direction throughout the game, whether intentional or not. Then the other fact about Claude's personality that can be verified is the fact that he is extremely focused. When he sets his mind on something, he will stop at nothing to do it, and any collateral damage in the meantime is just that. Collateral damage. That's a problem for someone else. And that's another reason why I believe that he's doing all these things without a second thought. While he may not necessarily know that this is all leading to an eventual confrontation, he's trying to build himself up in the criminal underworld by any means necessary in order to eventually be able to use his connections to take on the Colombians and therefore take on Catalina. No matter what it takes, he's willing to do anything. And honestly, one of the points against Maria would be the fact that Claude was doing a good job in building himself up until he was able to consolidate his power and get his revenge. It wasn't until Maria decided to drag him into an unrelated marital crisis that it all came temporarily crashing down for him. If he's an extremely focused person and is focused on revenge, who's to say that focus couldn't shift from Catalina to Maria temporarily? He would have a pretty good reason for wanting to whack her for causing this pretty significant issue for him that shouldn't have involved him at all. Matter of fact, the idea that he waited until the end of the game to hypothetically kill her isn't actually a point against the idea that he wanted revenge on her from this point, given the fact that Claude immediately meets Asuka at the point in which he would hypothetically want to kill her. and it becomes immediately clear that Asuka could be an asset. That probably put paid to any intention that Claude may have at this point to kill Maria. He wouldn't want to spoil the potential alliance while he was still at rock bottom. So perhaps he wanted to kill Maria at that moment but thought better of it. But we know for sure that Claude is able to hold a grudge. I mean, even after becoming more rich and more powerful than he ever could with Catalina, he still wanted revenge. But whether or not he wants to take revenge also depends on whether or not enough time and distance could have been put between Maria screwing the pooch and the end of the game for him to still care by that point, given the fact that he had gotten what he wanted regardless of how he got from A to B. It also depends on whether or not what Maria did is equal enough to what Catalina did that he would feel the need to take revenge when he had the opportunity. And to be fair, if he did decide to take revenge on Maria, he couldn't have picked a better time. All the Yakuza he had allied himself with were dead, all his other contacts were either dead or had fled the city, and given the fact that this entire situation in the final mission was a complete massacre, she would only be one more body among the many that had died that day during the final mission. So insofar as he could get away with murder consequence-free, he could get away with it at this point. Nobody was left that could have come after him, and she could have just been considered another person killed in a gang fight. But then again, why would he wait until after the battle is over then, and why is it a failure state to have Maria die during the mission? I think the fact that Maria dying is a failure state means that he could have potentially at least tokenly not wanted her to be collateral damage because she realistically is an innocent bystander in all of this.
Did you turn up to rescue Maria or to get me back? Well, I got news for you. Shooting you will be a pleasure, but dating you was only business.
Everything that happened with the Colombian cartel and Catalina had nothing to do with Maria. However, can we really judge story elements with gameplay context as vague as that anyway? The idea that killing her was a failure state? Well, I guess that depends on your perspective, because on one hand, that's what the developers wanted, so that's what happened. They theoretically could have made two separate endings depending on whether or not Maria survived, but it's also entirely within their right to consider something the canon ending as opposed to making a separate ending just to answer a question that nobody ever asked. It doesn't necessarily rule out that he would get petty revenge on her once everything was said and done, and he could get away with it without alienating himself from any contact or incriminating himself further, but the timing of the whole thing seems weird to me. So perhaps it's not that Claude didn't want Maria to be collateral damage, it's just that that's the canon ending and they decided to make that a failure state because Maria dying isn't part of the canon ending. But let's just say for the sake of argument that the desire for revenge leading him to kill Maria is inconclusive, and that just leaves one thing. The fact that she was being completely annoying and he was just mentally done with the whole thing. In fairness, Claude had killed people for much less, both inside and outside of story context. So it's not necessarily unreasonable to assume that he had just been through hell, she was annoying him, and he decided to put an ending to the annoyance in the American way. The one reason I'm hesitant to say that he did without a shadow of a doubt shoot her in the end is that despite having a single-minded dedication to get from A to B, he accomplished his task by the time he and Maria are walking away. She's not any threat to him, nor is she of any consequence to him anymore because whatever consequence she played had been paid off. So in the end, what would he have stood to gain from killing her other than another murder charge on the hypothetical growing list? He could have very easily just fired off a warning shot as a non-verbal cue to get her to shut up and f*** off.
Can you believe it? This one cost me $50.
I mean, he didn't have any other way to communicate with her. If Claude wasn't a silent protagonist, there would be no question here. At that point, if he wanted to shut her up, he could just tell her to shut up. But if he wanted to kill her, he'd kill her. It's that communication barrier that makes the question here. If you can't speak, there's worse ways to get someone's attention or to shut them the hell up. But at the same time, I feel like those two reasons individually are too minor to counteract the sea of reasons that he would have done it. He's a sociopath who had killed many people for less. He's a man who will accomplish what he sets out to accomplish come hell or high water. He has a penchant for revenge. But he was also never in a position up to this point where he could have gotten revenge on her. If I were to delve deep into the mind of Claude to really get an understanding for what went on, I think when Maria screwed him over, he was probably really eager to kill her for screwing everything up, but he needed her alive as a bargaining chip and as a means to keep things rolling in a way he wanted things to roll. But I think over time, with the way things went, he had softened his stance because despite what she did, things worked out anyway. Plus, it's not like she did what she did out of any sort of maliciousness like what Catalina did. Maria just made a stupid mistake, and sociopath or not, I'm sure someone could recognize that fact. So that by the time of the final few missions, he maybe didn't hate her, but was more apathetic, and once again saw her as a means to get face to face with Catalina once she got captured. However, once it was all said and done and they were walking away, he was content just letting Maria go her own way, but she refused to go her own way and just continued to latch onto Claude. Assuming he was just apathetic at that point, he wouldn't be into that, but he wouldn't necessarily cap her right away. Though I guess that begs the question, would a sociopath like Claude calm down enough to not see Maria as someone worth killing? I've never met a sociopath, so I can neither confirm nor deny. However, she just refused to go away and continued to push his buttons. So after walking away from the scene of the crime for a little while and getting more and more annoyed with her, after a while apathy turns to annoyance and he decided he was simply done with this whole charade and capped her in the back of the head. And even if that's not the sequence of events, it's still perfectly reasonable to assume that he did plan on killing her all along and was just waiting for the right time. Walking away from the scene of the crime and letting her prattle on may have just been for no real reason. Perhaps he wanted to get away from the crime scene. Perhaps he had some other reason. Of these two possibilities, I think the former reason is the more likely possibility, but the latter is also fairly possible. So I think it's safe to conclude that it's overwhelmingly likely that yes, based on story context, Claude shot Maria. I would say I'm still a little bit hesitant, like 20% hesitant just based on some of the things that didn't quite add up in my mind, but it's definitely the most likely option. Something that most of my audience agreed with. Although there were some other funny options that people did bring up, such as the idea that it was actually Maria who shot Claude and she was just leading him into a false sense of security by making herself seem like the resident damsel in distress, which leaves her open to be the next big gang leader in the city. I mean, it's funny, but it's definitely not true because she has no resources to start up a new gang unless this was a large-scale conspiracy within the Leone family to eliminate Salvatore, then greatly weaken all the competition before inserting Maria as the new leader of the Leone family. But that's fanfiction as far as I'm concerned. The other funny idea someone came up with was perhaps neither Maria or Claude shot, and perhaps it was a surviving Colombian gang member who shot at them. Or perhaps a surviving Colombian gang member got shot at, and that made things awkward enough that the conversation stopped thereafter. There's a lot of funny possibilities. Let me know what you think is the most ridiculous possible scenario to explain the gunshot after the fade to black. But as for the most likely explanation, while it's not 100% definitive, I do believe that Claude did indeed cap Maria to cap off the game. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and enable notifications so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.